We're good? Okay. Good morning. We're trying to finish up the sugi that we started a few weeks ago. We were discussing evolution in the Torah. We discussed Sefer or two that were very pro-evolution, that really believed that it was something that explains Bereshis well. We discussed, obviously, the normative standpoint and that isn't such a great shidduch. Now, I wanted to talk about one of the particular finds that made waves that a lot of Sfarim spoke about, and that is dinosaur bones. Dinosaur bones, might surprise you, were never discovered until about 200 years ago. No one ever found a dinosaur bone before Be'erach 200 years ago. It was a brand new type of thing to find. And it threw science into major upheaval, and science had to figure out what these bones were. They were much larger than anything that had been seen. Any animal on it that we knew of would have been way too small to leave behind a bone like this. And science got very busy, figuring it out. Now, I want to share just a small story about dinosaur bone hunting. It's a totally secular historical story, but I think it highlights a point. Last time we spoke about this, if there was any takeaway message from it, the point was that it's hard to separate the scientist from the science. Science ostensibly claims to be fact-based, meaning everything's fact-based. You see it how it is. It's not debatable. It's not deniable. But science and scientists are hard to separate, and scientists are full of agendas and mistakes and over-assessments of their ability to know things. And we went through a few different quotes of different scientists who had the feeling they were done exploring everything already and only to be totally upturned later on. And the point was that there's not really such a reason to feel even intimidated from the scientists, because it's a constantly evolving and flowing matter, and there's, nothing was so set. Now, in particular, dinosaur bones, there's a great story that highlights this. There's a thing, you could look it up, it's called the Bone Wars. That's what it was called. It was called the Bone Wars. It's two young paleontologists in the late 1800s. One of them's name was Nathaniel Charles Marsh. Two guys, no one here is Jewish. And the second one was Edward Drinker Koch. Two paleontologists, young paleontologists, they both were supposed to be doctors, I think, and became obsessed with fossils and decided to go hunting for dinosaurs. One of them owned a tar pit in New Jersey somewhere, where they had managed to dig up a bunch of different fossils and bones that were very exciting to the paleontology community. And both of these two young men got fully invested in hunting for dinosaur bones. Now, they started off as friends, and originally each one of them even named the dinosaur find after the other one. They were, friends, they worked together. Eventually, they had a terrible falling out, because allegedly, the way the story goes is Edward Koch discovered a dinosaur that was an aquatic dinosaur that was many, many feet long, and he gathered the bones together and he had them displayed, and then he made a sketch to publish it in the Scientific American, and in it he placed the bones for the head where the bones for the tail should be, and the bones for the tails where the bones for the head should be. He made a grave mistake, and he published it like this. Now, his former chavrusa and now enemy, Nathaniel Marsh, published a rebuttal in the Scientific American, making a gelech out of him, showing how Imamish didn't know what he was talking about, and he flipped the head with the tail, and he's clueless. And then each one of them started writing kolkeris against each other in the different papers of the day, and each one of them found investors, and they fueled a tremendous rush to dig up dinosaur bones, so each one could find something before the next one, discover the next dinosaur before his friend would, to beat them, to get it done. And they were so obsessed with beating the other one to make sure the other one didn't find anything left, that when they would be done with a site, they'd dynamite it. When they would find what they wanted in a site, they'd put dynamite sticks in it and they'd blow it up. So still today, paleontologists talk about the great damage that was done by this rivalry, the Bone Wars, in the late 1800s, because they would look for something, they'd find something, they'd blow the rest up quickly. So together, these two dinosaur collectors, these bone hunters, collected what they considered to be 144 new species. They wrote articles, they named them. I think in retrospect, when later scientists went through their work and figured out each thing, they ended up with being just 32 new species, just to show you about the rush to judgment and how excited they were and excitable they were. And scientists said about them that they did the biggest favor and the greatest disservice to the sugya of dinosaur bone hunting, of paleontology. They did the greatest favor because they made it so popular and so famous, and they collected dozens and dozens of different species of dinosaurs. but they did it the biggest disservice because they showed that science and scientists cannot be separated. They showed that the natural inclination for competition and to fight with each other could totally skew their perspective and their motivation and ruin all their scientific work. So I say this story only to highlight the idea that we've been trying to express over here, that the science and the scientists cannot be separated. Now, I want to discuss a little bit the idea of dinosaur bones, what different Achronim wrote about it, because it's a very modern phenomenon, and there's only late Achronim who wrote about it. I want to discuss a little bit what different Achronim wrote about it, and how it shtims or doesn't shtim, and etc. Now, we mentioned last week that the Tvaris Yisrael, in his Drush Orach Chaim, in the end of Nezikin, writes extensively about dinosaurs, and he writes an interesting things. I'll just bring us back up to speed again. The Tvaris Yisrael in Drush Orach Chaim, which we said is considered some sort of suffix if he even wrote it. The Minchas Lazar held that he never wrote it, and others were very upset about it. The Stipler, in a letter in Krana de Igrsa, writes not to learn from it. But in any case, the Tvaris Yisrael writes over there in the Drush Orach Chaim that he writes about a dinosaur that was found outside Baltimore. He writes about a large remains of a dinosaur that was found outside Baltimore, and he explains it as follows. He says there's a medrash. It's brought down in two places. The Zohar says something similar. It says HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Amar Vavo, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu was creating the world, he was creating worlds and destroying them until he came to the world that he was happy with, that he was satisfied with, and that's the world that we have today. That's the one we're living in. So what the Tvaris Yisrael suggests is that the worlds that Hashem created that preceded our world left some sort of remnants behind. They left these, remnants behind, these crusts, these shells, and therefore the dinosaur bones were from a previous world where the animals were much, much larger, and they remained, only the bones, the fossilized remains of the dinosaurs remains, but the worlds are gone. Otherwise, besides for that, the worlds are gone, and the world we have today has no dinosaurs in it. Now,
what's not clear for him to say that?
Because dinosaur bones, people are finding them, they're real. Meaning you can't deny that they're real, they exist. So the way that the aging and the dating, meaning, the way the science understood it, these are bones that had to be from a very long time ago. Animals like this couldn't coexist with the animals that are alive today. Humanity couldn't coexist. Additionally, they were never found, if you know how the rock, how silt works, meaning they were never found on the same level as any other animal fossil. Meaning dinosaur bones are on level 6, and then on top of them, and so on and so forth, woolly mammoths are the next one, and then regular animals and regular fish and birds and wildlife. So they were never found. So this is what the Tvaris Yisrael says. Now, granted, many of his contemporaries were greatly displeased with this explanation, and we spoke about this 2 weeks ago. Now, the two other contemporaries of the Tvaris Yisrael who spoke about dinosaurs and did not agree with him, but also didn't think that it was such a terrible stira that needed to be to work on, is the Malbim and the Netziv. Now, both of them on the same pasuk in Parshas Noach that says Vayimach Haskal Yikum. Hashem, it says Hashem wiped away everything that was alive on the planet. So, I want to read you the Netziv first a little bit, and then we'll go to the Malbim. The Netziv says like this: Vayimach Haskal Yikum. He says all the bodies were destroyed; they were vaporized. He says, and then he says, V'hein heine atzamas shemaitziin chayfrei eretz, the bones that paleontologists, diggers of the land find. They find all these bones from animals that don't exist anymore in our world. And from there they extrapolated, there must have been a world before us that had different creatures, he says. He says there is a Bereshis Rabbah, Medrash, that seems to imply that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created worlds and destroyed them. V'amar, he said, Dain haniyanli, v'dain loy haniyanli. This one I like, this one I don't like. Chaynu b'zayar, Kadosh Parshas Vayikra, al akasav, imzevach shalom karbanai. But here's the punchline, when Netziv kind of pulls the rug out from under the Tvaris Yisrael. He says, Mikal makayim, kasha l'daiti loymer came. Shay mavur b'shmeis rabba, elu tel das hashmayim v'aretz, ma pasal, shay abayra elamas v'mistakel ben v'loya areven alav, machzirin l'toyu v'vayu. The Medrash in Shemais, when it says this concept, it says HaKadosh Baruch Hu would create worlds, he'd look at them, v'mistakel ben v'loya areven alav. He didn't like them for whatever reason. He would return them to emptiness and nothingness. He says, there wouldn't be anything left over. How can you tell me there are bones from a previous world that are sitting here somewhere that are, still in the crusts of the earth? The Medrash, when it describes this concept of Beirei Lamas Machrivim, it says he destroyed it back to nothingness. So there's nothing left. So he says an alternate understanding. He says in the These bones, these dinosaur bones that are found, are from before the days of the Mabul. V'afagav shenitzayim in climates she'enim chayim sham. They're finding climates that don't match, the lifestyle of these dinosaurs. During the tkufa before the Mabul, they ran to other places. All sorts of strange creatures. Is because we know the Medrash tells us that during the Tkufas HaMabul, before Noach, even the animals didn't stay only with their min, and they intermarried min to min. It says they created all sorts of crazy creatures, and these are them. And he says, Hashem wanted on purpose that these bones should stick around, so that the last dar, our dar, should come. The Yaker Sisra Ateva v'zekvei Yisparach. We should see that nature is mystifying, and that we don't have the answers to everything, and we don't understand everything, and we should be makir the covenant of HaKadosh Baruch Hu through that. So this is the Netziv. So there's two important details of this Netziv. So first of all, the Netziv kind of slugs up the Tvaris Yisrael's understanding of the Medrash. He says what the Tvaris Yisrael says in the Medrash, to explain all sorts of natural phenomena, to explain the dinosaur finds outside Baltimore. That only is understandable if you believe it that there's something that remained behind. But if the Medrash in Shemais, that's the similar Medrash that dovetails one with the other, explains it and says that if HaKadosh Baruch Hu is machzir and l'sayev avayu, he returns it to nothingness. So the nothingness is nothingness. It doesn't make sense to say. So he says a different teretz. Dinosaur bones are from before the Malbim. Now the Malbim on the same pasuk does a similar thing. He says the bones are like metal and they don't get destroyed. But he says still they get. He's answering a different question. He says Vayimach Haskala Yikom HaKadosh Baruch Hu washed away everything. He says if HaKadosh Baruch Hu destroyed everything, got rid of everything, how do you still have bones? He presumes the bones are real. We found them; they're real. There's dinosaur bones. But if HaKadosh Baruch Hu washed away everything, how do you have these bones? So he says the bones are like metal; they never deconstruct and degrade. So how do they still survive? He says what happens is during the Mabul, he says the earth, because of the tremendous pressure and stress that it was under, cracked open into these deep crevices. And the bones, the largest, remaining things that didn't degrade and weren't totally turned into nothingness, got sucked into these deep cracks and crevices. And when the earth settled down after the Mabul and it closed itself up somewhat, these dinosaur bones were buried deep in the crevices of the earth, and that's how they stayed there until modern era, when people had the ability to dig much deeper into the ground and to find things, and we started finding these dinosaur bones and woolly mammoths and etc. that are in the ground. This is his. The Malbim's point of view. Now again, he also seems to understand that, he quotes the Bar Lam Zochivin, and also seems to understand that if you're going to tell me that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created worlds beforehand and destroyed them again, it's impossible for anything to remain. Nothing would remain. It can't be that these dinosaurs are here from previous iterations and of the world. It has to be, these are things that happened in the present sense, and he just says the Malbim get rid of them. Now, they appear aged, and they appear to be, from a long time ago and way too old to exist in the calendar and the clock and the structure that we have here, which is why these bones came to be such like a question on the Torah's presentation of Sheshis Mebereshis. So the Malbim addresses it in one line and says the Mabul created tremendous changes to the earth. It was a time of great stress, and anything that happened in such great stress in the earth cannot be calculated by the different frameworks that the scientists have today. Now, would it surprise me if in 10 years someone came out and said that everything we knew about carbon dating was wrong, and really when this molecule meets this molecule, it degrades 9 times faster? Nothing would surprise me. So essentially, like we keep seeing again and again, it's something that's built on a certain understanding that we have that could easily change, that could easily be modified. So the Malbim says, I give you a variable. I give you the Mabul. The Mabul's a variable. We don't really know how the Mabul affects the way time is counted, the way these things degrade, the way they got to where they got to. So I give you a variable that you can't explain, and that's it. That's the Malbim's explanation. Now, to circle back to the letter from Baron Feldman that we left off with last week. So now he mentions yet a different theory of how the world appears to be so old, even though the Torah tells us it's not that old. And this is an interesting theory. This is a theory that was popularized by Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan. Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan was a Baal Tshuva. He grew up in the Bronx. He later moved to Kensington. He died before 50, I think. He was a prolific writer, a translator. He wrote the Me'am Leis in English, what's it called? Torah Anthology, I think it's called. Like a lot of old shuls, you'll see it. It's, 50 volumes, whatever, like a tremendous thing. The Me'am Leis is written in Ladino, like a Sephardi Yiddish of sorts. Most of us don't speak Ladino. Then later it was translated into Hebrew. So Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan would sit with Me'am Leis in Ladino on his right and Hebrew on his left, and he would just write in the middle. So he was a tremendously talented brain. He incidentally, he was a Rav, but spent most of his rabbinic career in the conservative movement. He was a Rav in several different conservative shuls, like in Kentucky and like very far out in the American experience. Somewhere along his journey, he went to school, he got a doctorate in mathematics, I think, or physics. He was a brilliant man. He gave a lecture about the age of the universe that was later turned into a book. You could buy it on Amazon. It's a book about the age of the universe from Aryeh Kaplan. He never wrote it himself, even though he was a prolific writer. This is a lecture that was transcribed. And in it he suggests this theory that later on became somewhat popular. It's a theory as follows. There's a Mekubal who was somewhat of a contemporary of the Ramban. He was called Rabbi Yitzchak de Menako. Now, he is known allegedly, supposedly we refer to him as a Talmud of the Ramban. The problem is that the Ramban died when he was 20 years old, and the Ramban only lived in Akko for the last 3 to 6 months of his life. So at best, there was a very short interaction between a young Rabbi Yitzchak de Menako and a very old, almost dying Ramban. So there's some possibility of interaction between them, but not like a Talmud, like what you would think in the traditional sense of someone sitting and learning, Rev Chachmaseh from him. Now, Rabbi Yitzchak de Menako, in one of his Svarim, quotes from from an earlier sefer called Sefer Atmuna that suggests an interesting cheshbon. Now, he suggests that the world.
We have Sefer Atmuna?
What do you say? No, I don't think so. I don't know for sure. I don't think so. He suggests that the world is set into cycles of shmitas. I'll read you his mathematical calculation. I don't understand it so well. He says the calculation is that the world is set into cycles of shmitas. Now, each cycle of Shemitah is comprised of I think 7,000 years instead of 7 or 700, 7,000 years, and every cycle is repeated 7 times. So, and the Sefer HaTmura says that we're in the 7th cycle. So, if you do the math, I think, and you calculate. One second. There's one more detail, and you calculate that every one of the days is a days of like Yemei Shnei Seinu B'Em Elef Shanim. Each one's 1,000 years. It comes out that a year is really comprised of 365,250 days, times 42,000 for the cycles, equals 15.34 billion, which is Pachas Yaiser, what the science world believes the age of the universe is. So you have this calculation based on a Makubal who explained that the world is running in cycles, and we're only in one of the cycles, and Memela, this is a way to shtim the age of the earth, things that appear much older, even though even though the Torah tells us younger years, and our years only start counting from the beginning of the 7th cycle, which is much later. Now, it's a mathematical calculation. Now, there's Rabbi Aaron Feldman in his letter, when he's not liking Slifkin's answers, brings these 2 different rationales. Meaning, in his letter that we were reading from last time, when he's debating Slifkin, Slifkin says that the Sheshis Mebreshis meant I'll read you what he quotes. He says he posits that the 6 days of creation refer to the actual 15 billion literal years during which the world evolved from the first Big Bang until the creation of man. The 6 days of creation, explains Sifkin, do not refer to the real world, but are concepts of creation which existed in God's mind. Accordingly, there were no 6 separate acts of creation, as the Torah teaches, but a seamless evolution put into action in the first moment of creation, a single act which expressed 6 divine concepts. So this is what Slifkin's idea of Sheshis Mebreshis was, to which Aaron Feldman is very, very disturbed. And in it, he writes that, why do you have to go there? I'll give you some of the theories that exist to explain it. I mean, even if you don't like any of them specifically, I'll give you some of the theories that exist. And in it, he brings this theory of Yitzchak de Menako, and also this theory of what the Malbim and the Siva are expressing, that the Mabul was just a scrambler, meaning the Mabul puts you with an inability to apply the regular laws of nature to what your findings are. Now, incidentally, after this whole Slifkin controversy, the main, response from the Torah world, besides for Kolkarius and bans and whatever, was this book. You could buy it. It's Torah, Chazal, and Science from Moshe Meiselman. He's the Reshiva of Tomo, right? I'm sure people know him. He's an interesting guy. He grew up in Boston. He's a nephew of Rabbi Soloveitchik from YU. He's an Einikl of Rav Chaim, an Einikl of Rabbi Salevi. His mother, Rebbe Shalamis Meiselman, was Rabbi Soloveitchik's sister. She actually wrote a great book about the Soloveitchik heritage, but he went to, I think he went to Harvard and then MIT, and he was a professor even in Brooklyn College for a little bit. He's a physicist, a mathematician, and then he became a rabbi. Then he became a practicing rabbi. He moved to LA, he opened the high school, and he moved to Israel, and he opened Tomo. So he's an old man today, but he has a long, distinguished career, first as a scientist and then as a rabbi. And he put out like a 1,000-page tome to rebut Slifkin's assertions and to explain everything. And in there, he brings various different things. And if you read it, you won't love everything, but you'll love something. You'll definitely find something good in there. But he in there brings this theory of Rebitzik the Menako of the time, and he raises what I think is a very interesting point why he doesn't like it. He says, if you're going to tell me this whole calculation that there's really 15 billion years that are spread through multiple different elamas, multiple different shemitah cycles, and etc. He says, so then that assumes that there's some sort of clock, like on the outside of everything, that's counting continuously from beginning to end. This is like similar to the taina of the Netziv and the Malbim on the Torah Yisrael. He's like, you assume that there's an outside clock that counts continuously, and it keeps ticking along. It starts Olam Rishon, it gets to 42,000 years, it keeps turning, it gets to 150, 350, 1 year passes, 2 year passes, billions, but it just keeps ticking along into the next cycle, into the next cycle, into the next cycle. He says, L'chaira, if the Rebitzik the Menako is an interpretation of this medrash that says, because the Baruch Hu is creating cycle after cycle to go through the world, then L'chaira, the clock stops. It's a brand new clock. It's a new world, new clock. How do you presume there's like an outside clock that keeps ticking along, that's like, aging, the world is so to speak, aging with this clock as the cycles of the world continue? It doesn't really make so much sense. And then he goes on to other things he likes to establish that we don't go with Das Yachid ever, and etc. But I thought that's an interesting point. It mirrors the point of the Torah Yisrael and of the Netziv and the Malbim in asking on the Torah Yisrael. Like, if you're going to say a Be'er Lamas Machrivim, it shouldn't leave behind any residue. It shouldn't be a way to calculate from one world to the next world to the next world. That shouldn't be. Now, he's saying the world is older. Our world that we live in now.
When did the clock stop?
So that's what I'm saying. Yeah, presumes the clock started. What did he say? Time was created on day one. Right. The problem is that there's a lot of Midrashim that seem to say time was created on day 4, rather in our time. Also, why would you assume time was created on day 1 and it's like an overarching time? Like it keeps, the universe that we have, the world that we have exists in that time, and it keeps counting for 15 billion years, while the world is cycled through again and again, brand new worlds. Meaning if the Midrash says it's brand new worlds, brand new implies everything. Like the whole...
He's saying that it's brand new worlds?
That's what the Rebitzik the Menako seems to be saying.
He's saying it's brand new worlds or the world itself?
The way of Aryeh Kaplan wanted to say it was brand new worlds, meaning he's trying to stem the Medrash. He's putting all these components together. Now, there is one last piece, and I'll end with this. Call it more of like a power of a take, somewhere in the middle of all these different things, is Rabbi Belsky. Rabbi Belsky, in his Sefer on Chumash, has a very nice world overview. He cautions you not to take anything too concretely and not to commit yourself to one specific narrative, because all of them are kind of, each one has its strengths, its weaknesses. He says the Torah says what the Torah says, believe the Torah at face value. If it doesn't stem with exactly what scientists say, don't be too intimidated. Science changes, science is evolving, science moves. And in there he brings this, his understanding of this medrash of Be'er Lamas Machrivim, which is interesting. Now, he doesn't go so much into the chronology, like into how to calculate the clock and the time, but he just says it's interesting to note that from what modern science understands today, he says, Lamashal, all fossil fuels, right, all coal, gas, oil that we live on, that the world lives on today, is basically, it's tremendous amounts of material, of natural material, like plants that degraded and animals that degraded, and over a long amount of time, or a quick amount of time, if HaKadosh Baruch Hu wills it so, these fossils degrade into fossil fuel that could fuel the entire world. Then you could extract them from the ground and you could use them. Or Lamashal says soil, that everything grows from, the soil that the whole world is filled with, topsoil. Topsoil is when glaciers are melting slowly or quickly, if HaKadosh Baruch Hu desires it so, and it grinds up the top level of the rock of the ground together with soil, and it mixes it into a very, very nutrient-rich mix. It grinds it into a very fine, powdery, nutrient-rich mix that could be used to grow things that you wouldn't otherwise be able to grow in rock. So, and more examples like this. He talks about how stars burning out create the atoms and the protons and the neutrons and all the atomic material that the universe needs to exist. So he says, forget about time exactly. Forget about figuring out exactly how long it took for this to happen. Forget about trying to understand, how science is dating stems with what we find. He says, just look at it like this. Look at it like science is in the middle of uncovering some of the Neflayos HaBe'er. He says, science is in the middle of uncovering what it means, Be'er Lamas Machrivim. What it means that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created all the ruins of previous things, or the ruins of other things that lead to the growth and to the existence of the universe. So he kind of like side skirts the whole issue of time, of chronology, and just says, look at science as a tool to explain the depth of the Neflayos HaBeirah, to explain how this world is built on layer after layer that are all necessary for the world. He says, Beirah Lamas Machrivim might not even mean a previous world, a different amount of time. Beirah Lamas Machrivim means the world is built on ruins, because the ruins of what HaKadosh Baruch Hu put into the world are what allow the world to function. It's these ruins that allow the world that we live on today to work. It's the topsoil, it's the environment, it's the fossil fuels, etc. So this is his kind of, I would call it like a dancing between the raindrops type of viewpoint to explain the Medrash without going too deep into the chronology. And I think we'll hold it on with this on this topic. I want to start a new series, I think, on Nevuah, Ruach HaKodesh, Baskel, dreams, Geirolis, all sorts of other ways to know things, except all less factual ways to know, all things that need some sort of divine intervention to teach us something.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.